Hello, everyone. Welcome. William and Mary acknowledges the indigenous people who are the original inhabitants of the lands our campus is on today. The Cherahanika, Nottoway, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Mattaponi, Monacan, Nansemond, Nottoway, Pamunkey, Potawatomi, Upper Mattaponi, and Rappahannock tribes, and we pay our respects to their tribal members, past and present. Welcome again. I'm so glad to see you. It's so wonderful to see this room full. We are very excited about this event. We've been waiting to put it on for 5 years, and it is happening today. My name is Teresa Longo. I am the Associate Provost for International Affairs and the Executive Director of the Reeves Center for International Studies. Reeves is home to the annual Taylor Ross Lecture on International Peace. That's what this is today, the International Peace Lecture. Taylor Ross lectures in the past have included Alyssa Rubin, Ta-Nehisi Coates, and Timothy Snyder, and many other famous names. We are beyond delighted that Daniel Hernández Salazar has joined us to deliver the 2025 Taylor Ross Address. At the Reeves Center, we cultivated globally minded students, and we convene great hearts and minds from around the world. Thank you for joining us in this convening today. Before I turn the floor over, I want to do just a few thank yous, although there are very many thank yous I could do. I wish to recognize the people who have made this coming together possible, specifically the staff at the Reeves Center, the Arts and Sciences Dean's Office, and the Muscarelli Museum of Art. And now I would like to welcome Professor Betsy Konefal. Professor Konefal is an expert on Guatemalan history, and she will introduce the keynote speaker that we have for a series we've been running all semester on arts and democracy, Daniel Hernández Salazar. So Betsy, welcome, and thank you for doing the introduction.
Hello. It's with great pleasure that I introduce our speaker today, Guatemalan photographer and artivist, Daniel Hernández Salazar. Daniel is the creator of some of the most iconic images that help us see the complexity of Guatemala's recent past, both its beauty and its pain. He's shared with Guatemala and the world, and now with William and Mary, images that capture the hopes of truth and reconciliation processes and transitional justice, and their frustrations and their tensions. Daniel began studying architecture in the late 1970s and soon turned to photojournalism, working in the 1980s in the midst of Guatemala's armed conflict for international agencies including Reuters and the Associated Press. He now works as an independent photographer, and much of his work focuses on historical memory. His photos have been presented in solo exhibitions and group shows in Latin America and the US, Europe, Japan, and Korea. He's won prizes for his artistic work in support of human rights, and he was named Knight and Officer of the Order of Arts and Letters by the French government. So we have a knight among us. His photographs have been published in personal anthologies, including the beautiful text, So That All Shall Know. And he's been featured in publications including the New York Times, Lens Blog, and Harper's. He's currently working as the official photographer of Guatemala's new president, Bernardo Arévalo. I'm a historian, and I am particularly grateful that Daniel's camera lens seems to have focused on virtually every crucial moment in recent Guatemalan history. As society in fits and starts headed toward a negotiated peace in the 1990s, and then has tried to make it meaningful and lasting and just. He has documented the crucial work of forensic anthropologists as they exhumed massacre victims. He photographed marches protesting continued violence and impunity. His series of 4 angels, one of which you see here, which are now featured at the Mascarelli Museum of Art, they grace the covers of the Catholic Church's Human Rights Report, Nunca Más, or Never Again. One of those angels, the one you see here, the one speaking out or maybe screaming, I'm not sure, has become a symbol of the right to truth and justice in Guatemala and far beyond. For years, I've asked my students to study his work, especially these angels, which are made of a man's figure juxtaposed with the bones of a massacre victim. That the bones appear in the shape of wings. I want to close with just a few of the students' comments from this week that I found particularly moving. A student named Chloe noted that when you think about angels in the Bible, they're often not the sweet or serene figures portrayed in popular culture, but rather when people encounter them, it is with fear and trembling. These beings are messengers of divine will, and while sometimes they come bearing news of hope, they just as often are arriving as harbingers of destruction or of profound change. Hernández Salazar's piece captures that unsettling side of angelic symbolism, forcing us to reconsider what it means to bear witness, drawing the viewer into a dialogue with history, trauma, and remembrance. Thank you, Chloe. She also said the bones serve as a reminder of the lives once lived and the stories untold. Even when the physical body is gone, those screams from the pain and trauma persist. It's as if the echoes of suffering remain long after the flesh has decayed. It refuses to be buried, demanding recognition and justice. Just one more. Isabella wrote that artwork should make you feel. However, I feel inadequate even attempting to describe the emotions that Daniel Hernández Salazar's angels invoked. The image is a powerful depiction of war and injustice, a cry frozen in time. It immortalizes the intensity of pain and passion. What struck me most, she said, was the deterioration of these postings. Though many have faded, some to nearly the point of obscurity, their presence lingers, much like how the horrors of the past continue to haunt us in ways we may not always perceive. So thank you, Danielle, for creating work that helps these students feel this history. Thank you for coming to share it with us. Thank you to William and Mary and the Reeves Center for recognizing its tremendous value. And everyone, please join me in welcoming Daniel Hernández Salazar.
Hello, good evening. I am also very moved and proud to be here. As Teresa told, it was a 5-year journey to finally come to here. I want to share with you what I think photography should do in the world, and I hope I don't take too much more time than I should, because it's difficult to resume a lot of things I would like to tell you. I hope I don't go more than an hour, so I better start now. Hey, what happened? So first, I would like to tell you which I consider are the foundations of my work. I think first that art must be looking always to transform things. And also, I think that art can change how we perceive the world, how we think the world is, or perhaps if we make enough effort, perhaps we can change something in the world. That's the goal. And also, I think that art can be a factor of social change only if we artists embrace the commitment of building a new and different society, and art transcends its mere decorative nature and exploits its communicative and evocative nature. I always think art is a force of renewal, of changing things and commenting things we don't like in society or in our lives. And also I would like to tell you that all the photographs in the presentation are mine, but two. This one, of course, is not mine. It's me on the 23rd of March, 1982, in front of the cathedral. This is the building you see in the background. And on the left, you don't see the National Palace. And the cannon there, together with other 3 cannons, were loaded to shoot against the palace to force a military dictator to go out. Because we were in elections, they made fraud, and they wanted to continue a series of military leaders who wanted to repress people and to keep robbing and doing bad things. So finally, some young officers from the army made a coup, and the dictator fell. But I have this good, wonderful memory of those days to show you that I've been around for a long time following the story. I had I think, 28 years old. I was 20 years old in those days, more or less. So what happened in my country? To start this picture, I took it in the road that goes through the southern coast of Guatemala, through the big farms owned by the oligarchs. In Guatemala, perhaps 70 or 80% of the land is owned by 5% of the people, of the rich people, leaving the indigenous and poor people almost without land. So I will give you some context. Between 1930 and 1944, we had a dictator called Jorge Ubico, who was very, very famous, and he ruled Guatemala for 14 years, during which people were repressed, and anyone who would not obey his orders could suffer enormously. So finally, in 1944, there was a movement, a military and civilian movement, that was able to force him to resign and initiate 10 years of what we call the Democratic Spring of Guatemala from 1944 to 1954. During those years, we had 2 democratically elected governments. The first one, Juan José Arévalo, the father of the present president of Guatemala, Bernardo, during whose regime he made a lot of changes. He was a teacher, and he instituted most of all the social institutions we still have in Guatemala, like the Work Code, the Social Security Institute, the autonomy of the National University, the right to vote for women and illiterate people, and the right to free association, the National Literacy Committee, the Bank of Guatemala, the Institute for the Promotion of Production, and finally, the recognition of private property, something that the rich people really appreciate and fight for. And they forget that the revolution gave them the right to, or the recognition to have private property. After Juan José Arévalo, the next government was his former Minister of Defense, Colonel Jacobo Arbenz, who wanted to continue with the reforms of Arévalo, but perhaps he pushed too strong, and he wanted to make an agrarian reform. And in those days, there was a very particular company whose name, perhaps you know, United Fruit Company, and they owned hundreds of square kilometers, miles of banana plantations, and they owned also the railroad company for Central America, not only for Guatemala. And when Arbenz wanted to nationalize their lands, which they have declared for 1/10 of the real value, they didn't like that, and through the work of other two very well-known men whose name was Dulles, who were the former lawyers of that company, and in that moment were the Secretary of State and the director of the CIA of the Eisenhower administration, they planned an intervention to take down Arbenz. So this coup d'etat, sponsored by the CIA and the conservative sectors of the army and the oligarchs, interrupted the democratic process we had in Guatemala, and all the advancements of the revolution stopped. Then, shortly afterwards, in the early 60s, an internal armed conflict began, which became into a civil war. And it started on the eastern part of the country, but rapidly spread out all over the country. And the worst years were during the 1980s, until there was a coup d'etat again in 1982, which put it in power General Efraín Ríos Montt, who was the most cruel of all. During his term, more than half of the human rights abuses in Guatemala happened. And then, 36 years after the initiation of the war, we had a peace signature, the signature of the peace accords between the guerrillas, the army, and the government on the 29th of December, 1996. So that's very rapidly the context of my work. This is one of the first pictures I took as a reporter for France Press. It's a worker who is being captured by the then national police, who, by the way, used these helmets you are going to see better in another picture, that I'm sure came from the German army during the war, so Nazi helmets. The causes of the war, we could start by the closing of political spaces, because you couldn't say anything, liberty of expression wasn't there, freedom of association, nothing. People began to be chased. There was not a will to continue the structural social reforms that the country needed. Of course, there was social injustice, social exclusion. The indigenous people only served as servants, as almost slaves in the fincas, in the big farms owned by the oligarchs in the south. Now, of course, poverty was all over, and racism has always been there. Only in these last years, more in this last government, that is changing substantially. So one of my first pictures I sent for France Press was this one, where you see relatives of disappeared union leaders in front of the house where they met normally and where they were kidnapped by security forces, making a demonstration, remembering them and asking for their appearance or to know what happened to them. These people are relatives also of people who were disappeared, who were demonstrating in front of the National Cathedral. But I like the picture because you feel like the society was in a jail all the time. No one could really express themselves as they would like to. Now, to give you some information about the numbers in the war, on the left we have the percentage of population that was killed, the highest percentage, 83.33% of the killings were against indigenous people, and almost 17% Ladino, which are white people like me. And on the right side, it's interesting to see how the continuous line is indigenous people and being killed or disappeared, and the dotted line is Ladino white people. And the beginning of the war, indigenous were killed more or less, and Ladino not so much. Ladino were killed more, and the indigenous not so much. But you see, in 1982, when Rios Montt was in power, the indigenous massacres were the worst. There were many, many, many people who were killed, and the people in the cities, the white people, a little bit less, but nevertheless a lot. This is a picture I took of a widow with her children walking in the new section of a cemetery in a little village in El Quiché province, where the people who were disappeared or killed during those days were being buried, the ones that could be buried, because the others, the majority, were just thrown in clandestine graves. By the way, this information comes from the official Commission of Clarification stated by the UN, the Guatemalan government, and the army. So these are confirmed data. This is a map of Guatemala showing the regions where massacres happen. And it's interesting to see a coincidence of the massacres with social exclusion, poverty, and cultural diversity. The northwest part of Guatemala is more indigenous, poorer, and also the eastern part close to Honduras on the right. And the worst department, the department who was most hit in black, is El Quiché, with more than half of the massacres, the total of massacres that happened during the Civil War. This is one of many clandestine graves I had the opportunity to photograph. It's in a small village called Comalapa, a village known by its painters, artists, all indigenous people. But in these graves, close to this town, you don't only find people from the region, you also find people from the city and other parts of the country, because they moved the prisoners from one place to the other to finally kill them. And in this photo, it's interesting to see on the left top of the image, you see some pots. Those are pre-Columbian pottery, because the army put their military base on top of an old Indian cemetery. So in these pictures, in these graves, the remains of the victims of the war mixed with the old Indian cemetery. And this picture is during an exhumation. The community, the relatives of the people who are going to be exhumed come to identify them because they remember the clothing they had or objects they had. So they are surrounding the grave where the forensic anthropologists are working. And this picture, I took it one day that an association of families, of relatives of victims of the war did one of many marches, but this one was called the March Against Oblivion, and it was the only time that they put such a title in a march. Always asking to know what happened to their loved ones. Now, speaking about who was responsible for these abuses, the Commission concluded that 85% was to blame on the army, the national army, and 18% on civilian patrols, because the army forced in the indigenous area that the men should conform patrols to support the work of the army and to denounce people who were within the community that the army couldn't find. And the third 11% is responsibility is to military commissioners, who were people who were important on each community and who knew who was who in the community, and to kept control. It was like I don't know, the chief of a factory or something like that. And only 3% was a responsibility of the guerrillas. We always see the guerrillas as terrorists, but in this case, guerrillas were the only way left to civilian society to defend against state terrorism. And on the right, we see the resume of this violation. So 93% was a responsibility of the state and 3% for guerrillas. So we can see a clear tendency of who was the real guilty, or who to blame against all that. This picture is, I took it during a parade, because the army has a special day on the 30th of June, that they march. And these soldiers belong to a special battalion called Caidiles, which is well known for its very hard training and cruelty. So the post-war landscape in my country, the causes of the war still are present. They have changed, but they are still there. Historical inequalities, economic exploitation, political repression, and not now, but before, Cold War geopolitics. The social fabric has deteriorated, of course, and there is a huge erosion of collective memory, because the governments, since the war and after the war, don't want to recognize that the state was responsible for all that happened. Of course, following the orders of the oligarchs, because it was not the idea of the militaries. With this government, some things have started to change. So usually there was a lot of fear in the people in general. Now it's getting better. People tend to give their opinions more open, tend to ask for justice more often, and come close to the authorities with more confidence. And of course, before this government, there was like a policy of institutional oblivion. When the official commission of clarification gave their report, the then president, Álvaro Arzú, who was the one who signed peace, didn't want to receive the report from the three commissioners, because he knew that one of the conclusions was that a genocide had happened in Guatemala, and he didn't like it because he was part of the oligarchy. This picture is one of many marches of memorialization that happened and had happened and keep happening in Guatemala. This one in particular is of relatives of people who were killed in the burning of the Spanish embassy, when a group of peasants, directed by Rigoberta Menchú's father, Vicente Menchú, went to take peacefully the Spanish embassy, and the government, instead of negotiating with them, burnt the building with all the people inside, with, I don't know, how do you say lanzallamas? that thing that used the soldiers to send flames? Torches, yeah. They torched the building with the people inside. This picture is the night of the signature of the peace accords. What you see in the background is the National Palace, and the people in the picture are from left to right. Gustavo Porras, who was the Secretary of Peace, who was a peace negotiator, and before that, that day, I don't know if he belonged, but he was close to the guerrilla movement. Then the military is the Minister of Defense. Then the blonde guy with the torch is Álvaro Arzú, the president. And the man with the red and blue tie is Ricardo Ramirez, the general commander of the 4 guerrilla groups. It wasn't a happy night because neither the government, the army, or the guerrillas were happy with the results because everyone had to give something in exchange of signing peace. But at least we had it and the war officially ended. So within this context, my artistic proposal is that art should always raise awareness about the recent history in Guatemala, not allowing that to be forgotten, and that art should remember the horrors of war so that they don't repeat. That's something that is very important. We see now how history tends to repeat. For example, in Gaza, just to mention one. And art can't allow that human suffering to be forgotten. And then also we must remember who dies and who suffers in wars and conflicts. This picture is a burial ceremony of somebody who was captured, tortured, disappeared, killed, buried in a clandestine grave. But after some years, the Forensic Anthropology Foundation from Guatemala, through DNA analysis, was able to identify his remains. And they called the family and told him, "We found your son." So this is the... I'm sorry. So this is the version. So the power of photography resides in several things. I think that amongst other visual arts, photography usually provides the best evidence. But now that is not completely true because of artificial intelligence, because now any image can be created and it's really hard to know if it's true or not. So I had to add this asterisk and make this clarification. But nevertheless, it can be the best record of the real and can represent the unrepresentable. But the power of photography comes from uniting two seemingly contradictory features. First, that it can be evidence and bear witness, the truth value, and the other one that can be a personal testimony, a personal interpretation of an artist, so a symbolic value. And I try to combine both in order to make it more powerful. For example, a picture like this, it's a press photo, it's a document, it's a truth value image, but nothing else. But this other one of the same grave can be different. This grave is a mass grave of one of the first massacres who were publicly exposed in the press. The massacre of the Panzos village in Guatemala, where, I don't know, perhaps 600 or 700 people were killed. And this is a piece I created of the masquerade. But I try to represent in this montage how memory fades with time. All this work was still done with film cameras, not digital cameras. And my visual strategies are first confronting the audience, because people try to deny terrible things, things that make pain on them. But confronting, also adding aesthetic value to things or persons who are undervalued, denied, or refused. Also, creating visual icons, easily keep in collective consciousness and social memory, and using the public space. Also, recognizing and using the potential to communicate of every sort of publication. Installations, books, posters, social networks, postcards. Postcards not so much as before, because now we have the internet, but normally in the past I produced postcards and I really liked the object. So one of the first series I created confronting people was this series of traditional musicians from Guatemala, where are portraits of marginalized, unknown musicians from 5 different ethnomusical regions of Guatemala, and in a way converted into cult figures with the portraits, and making them as more visible as possible to the rest of society. These pictures were part of a larger project created by a friend anthropologist, in which we invited the most representative musicians of an ethnic group to be interviewed, recorded, and photographed. And the result of that were vinyl records, because it was in the 1980s, with pictures and with information about the musicians. This is the choir of the Catholic Church of the Garifuna Afro descendants in the northeast of Guatemala, called Livingston. This is a group of singers, traditional singers, who sing in Latin in Nevaj, a small village in Quiché department. This is a marimba group from the Quechí region in the north part of Guatemala. And this is a musical dance group called Los Chacalcojes from Totonicapán, the Quiché province of Guatemala. The Quiché ethnic group, the department of Totonicapán, but they speak Quiché also. And now, this is a completely different group. It's a series that I did, and I titled Beyond Weapons, and it's a series portraying members of the revolutionary movement. I always wanted to take photos of guerrilla members, but I couldn't, because I was afraid of the consequences. Because if you spoke with a guerrilla member, or go and know them in the regions where they were, you were a dead man for the army. You were the enemy. You were a communist or whatever. So I waited and waited and waited. But when the peace signature happened on December 1996, I ran to make the portraits in January, February 1997, before they gave their weapons. So, as I told you, I don't consider them terrorists, but I think they were the only chance civilian society had to defend itself against the terrorism of the state, because the state, supposedly by the Constitution, is forced to protect life, but in those days they did the opposite. And they were fighting for ethnic, social, and economic equality. The guerrilla group, which I had the chance to better know, was very diverse. They were members of many different indigenous groups and also from the cities, students from the university, intellectuals, so it was very diverse. And of course, defending the fundamental rights to land, education, health, freedom of speech, and social justice, things that the governments of Arevalo and Arbenz also were fighting for. So these pictures were taken by me in the, the center of command of one of the four groups called the EGP, Ejército Guerrillero de los Pobres, Guerrilla Army of the Poor, which was the largest group, by the way. This other one is from another group called FAR, Fuerzas Armadas Rebeldes, who was the first to be founded when there was an army, upheaval in the 1960s. So the first guerrillas were soldiers. That's something important to remember. This is again the EGP. This guy, of course, was somebody from the university. And I love this picture because also shows you that they were, of course, humans who had families and children inside of their camps in the jungle. And also there were many women participating in the war. Now, this is another different series from which the angels come. I call it Eros plus Thanatos, and it's a series about life and death. And is profoundly linked with Guatemala's recent history and war. The bones you are going to see in the pictures as the wings of the angels are remains of a victim of the war, which were exhumed and to which I had access because I collaborated with the forensic anthropologists during some years. And perhaps some of you would think that how could I use those bones for this kind of pictures? And I think it's delicate, could be controversial, but I want to say that I did it because I think it's a commemoration of memory, and it's a way of honoring and remembering the victims of the war. It's also very useful to make visible the violence experienced by many people. And these works also bear witness and can provoke a deep reflection on the consequences of war and its impact on the communities where the war happened. Also, these works can be a critique against a system that allowed that conflict to happen and that all the human rights abuses could be stayed in impunity. Also exploring on the aesthetic side the beauty of truth, even if it's hard So these are some of the works I included in that series. This is, by the way, the largest print I ever made. It was made with 15 sheets of photo paper, 20 by 24 inches. I decided to do it in a fragmented way for two reasons. First, because to print a picture of 250 by 2 meters is very difficult to handle, because you have to put it in liquids. And so my solution was to do it in parts. And also to break the picture and to fragment it is a way of representing how the lives of people have been broken and perhaps even destroyed. And normally I install the pictures, as you can see in the angels in the Mascarelli Museum, with little pins in a way to represent the torture of the people who died in the war. This I call the Death Pietà. Is of course inspired in the numerous Pietas like Michelangelo's, but instead of having the Virgin Mary holding the Christ, in this case, is Death who is taking the life of somebody. And this one was dedicated to the children who were killed during the war. This installation, it's called The Destruction of the Seed, which is the name of one of the chapters of the report the Human Rights Office of the Catholic Church produced. They dedicated a chapter of their report to the children who were killed during the war. So this piece is inspired on that. And this one I entitled Thanatos. It's a very large piece, like that size, more or less. It's composed of 50-something 8 by 10 sheets of photo paper. And this is the skull of a person whose arm you see behind him in the moment of the actual exhumation. It's covered with mud. And this one, it's the hip bones of a person together with the end of the spine, the column. But when I was doing the picture and I installed the bones on the table, I saw this form like an insect or a butterfly. So the title of the photograph is The Sacred Bug. Made me think of the Egyptian bug that died but came back from death the next day. Oh, I forgot something important. You see that there are numbers on the bones. Those are written by the forensic anthropologists and have the information of where they were exhumed and from which grave and which number of body in that grave. Now, my other strategy of creating visual icons, I want to analyze only 3 pictures. This one I called Encuentro de dos Mundos, Clash of Two Worlds, 1992. It's taking the name that Spain gave to the anniversary of the 500th anniversary of the discovery of the Americas. This picture is very interesting because for me it's a synthesis of the social contradictions and conflicts in Guatemala these days. You see on the left only women, on the right you see only men. Uniform person against civilians, indigenous against non-indigenous, and people from the countryside against people from the city. Color and identity against monochromy and lack of roots. And of course is historical evidence and a reminder. Again, you can see more clearly the helmets of the policemen, which are original Nazi helmets, because I saw them in many museums in Europe, and they have that little hole and the bolt. They are exactly the same. And something else, the aggression, the phallic aggression of the men policemen with the batons held like they hold against the women. I don't know if they thought about it, but in the image, it's undeniable. And this other photograph, I titled Demonstration. It's a memory of the relatives and victims of the war. It's a historical evidence, and it's a universal subject, because this grandmother could be, for example, from Guatemala, could be one of the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo in Argentina, or also could be one of the widows of Srebrenica in Bosnia. And she was doing a demonstration in front of the military academy in Guatemala City. And the last picture, which I want to analyze, is the one you know, the angel, so that all shall know, which uses an angel icon, but in this case, it's not a blonde, white man, but a young mestizo man, because I wanted him to be more representative of Guatemala, more or less, half white and half indigenous. And of course breaks with the traditional Catholic representation of the blonde angel. But the most important thing are the wings, which are two shoulder blade bones from a victim of the war exhumed from under a military base in Guatemala. And it's an active icon because it shouts the truth. It's the last of a series of 4 angels. Before, I created a triptych inspired in the monkeys that say, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. And it was used, this image together with the other 3, to illustrate the covers of the results of the investigation the Catholic Church did on human rights abuses in Guatemala. And also, I wanted that to be in proportion with the report's written descriptions. So before, there was the triptych. And when I showed these pictures to the Human Rights Office, when they asked me for photos for their books, after some discussion amongst their group, they decided to go with my pictures. I told them that I had to create the 4th one, because first they were going to break silence on all that happened during the war, and because they were going to publish 4 books. And the books were the result of the REMI report. REMI means Project of Recovery of Historical Memory, and details more than 55,000 human rights violations. And the weight of the publication, of course, are written text, narrative. So it needed a graphic support. The photographs after the publication became a symbol of the struggle for justice in post-war Guatemala. Particularly after the director of the project, Monsignor Juan Gerardi, was assassinated 2 days after he presented the official report in public. This is a picture of his funeral. I am standing on top of the cathedral, and all the people in white you see are all the bishops and priests from Guatemala. And 2 days after his assassination, the Office of Human Rights of the Church organized this march. They entitled the Silence March and used the posters that I designed with the pictures of the angels, first to make publicity for the books. Now they became placards to denounce the killing of the bishop, and it was very impressive that people were asked not to speak during the march, and there was an incredibly profound silence. You only heard the tolls of a bell from the cathedral and the sound of the clothing, something that you never hear because somebody's talking or there are cars or whatever, but there was so much silence that you could hear the clothing and the steps. So then, my other way of using art is in public spaces, because I consider that in the public space is where the collective unconscious dwells, and it represents a direct channel to better address the general public, to build awareness. And also democratizes art, because to go into a museum or a gallery is just for a few, for an elite, not for all the people. But the streets are where always people are, so it's better to communicate through the art in the streets. And my references, artists who I really admire, are amongst others, of course, is Christo and Jean-Claude. I suppose you've seen the interventions they did on landscapes and wrapping up buildings like the Reichstag, the Congress in Germany, and things like that. Things that really punched on society and made them think. Then Felix González Torres, a Cuban-American artist who used installations, sculpture, and photography to communicate. I saw a show of his work in Mexico City, and the thing I liked the most was that he had this exhibition inside the museum, but also like 6 of the pieces of the images were on billboards all around Mexico City. A little bit like we did now with the angels here. And then the last one is Llorenç Barber. He's a musician, a composer who does city concerts with bells. And with him, I was able to organize a bell concert in Guatemala to commemorate the first anniversary of the signature of the Peace Accords. You see me and him here on the bell tower of the cathedral on the day of the concert. I don't go into the details because it's too long, but it really made me understand how public space can help you to convey your message. So as a consequence of that, I envisioned the project of Street Angel, and it was the installation of 35 reproductions of the picture you already know in Guatemala City to commemorate the first anniversary of the killing of Monsignor Gerardi. And I chose the places according to 3 criteria. There's symbolic value related with the assassination of him, with memory, with the war, and the actors who were responsible for the atrocities during the war. Also a place where a lot of people would pass in front, either walking or in car, so many people would see them. And the last one was more personal, the aesthetic value of the place. And the angels' mission was to remind viewers that they must face the past and not forgetting easily. This was one of the best installations. It was at the end of a street, so you were driving and having this image one block away, and you had to drive directly to the angel. You couldn't not see it. This is how we did it, very similar as how we did it yesterday here with the students of the college. It was a guerrilla art project because it was completely clandestine, secret. Nobody knew but us, not even our families. We made like a pact of silence because of security and because personal security and because we didn't want the installation to lose power. It was very carefully planned. Yesterday, when we were installing the angels, we took perhaps half an hour to put up each angel. In that time, we had the goal was to do it in less than 5 minutes because we did it close to military facilities, next to the U.S. Embassy, in front of or at the facade of the church where the bishop was killed, places like that. So there was a certain risk. And very quickly installed, of course. And the goal was to take the public by surprise. This is other of my favorite images. It's two peasants with their oranges going to the market, just entering the main square of Guatemala. This one is in an underpass where a lot of cars go by. It's like a underworld, which had this aesthetic value I told you, but also many people saw it, and a very symbolic value because on top of this you have the statue of the national hero called Tecumuman. So this place combined all the criteria I wanted. So the reactions to this was that the audience was taken by surprise, and some were immediately and deliberately turned down, depending on where they were. For example, the one next to a bank owned by the oligarchs, Banco Industrial, and a theater also owned by oligarchs. Those were destroyed in hours. And close to military installation, when they understood, because like the day we did it and the next 2 or 3 days, nothing happened. But then a journalist and a writer from a paper interviewed me, and I explained the project and the reasons for it. All the angels that were close to the militaries were torn down immediately. But it was great because part of my idea was to get reactions, and the disparition of the angels recalled a little bit of the violence of the war and how people were also disappeared. And for me, it only added power to the installation because you saw that somebody was hit by the meaning. Others simply didn't understand, but asked themselves of the meaning of that, and perhaps asked to other people why these angels were in the streets. So this is one of the installations in front of one of the military forts, and then the absence of the angel. This other one was in front of the old military school, and this one was in the stadium of the army, because in Guatemala the army has a stadium, a bank, and several other things. This one is a combination of 3 pictures of the same installation showing how memory fades in time. The first picture was taken like 2 days after the installation, the one in the middle like 1 week, and the other one 1 month. But it's a visual representation of memory for me. This other one also I chose it because it's nice to see how the photographs interact with the daily life of the city. But in this time, you get only 3 women. And during the war and after the war, the role of women was very important because almost all of them lost their husband, their sons. So only the mothers and grandmothers were left. And you have a nun who comes from the realm of Monsignor Gerardi, for example, you have an indigenous woman and a non-indigenous one. So this image is very, very complete. This other one is of a reinstallation of the angel some years later during the trial against the dictator Rios Montt, in the same corner where it was installed in 1999. But I wanted to show you this picture because the woman on the left, whose name is Kate Doyle, she is from New York, and she is a very clever and powerful investigator about Guatemala's past, and working on secret documents from the US and Guatemala and other countries. That's his work in life. And she published the first document proving the responsibility of the army in the killings in Guatemala. It's called the Military Diary. And it's only pages with ID photos of people who were to be disappeared and disappeared. So you have the ID photo taken from their personal document, their name, their alias, the day they were captured and the day they were executed. And that's all written, and it's proven that comes from the army, and she made it public. So other reactions were that many posters lasted for a lot of time and worn out because of rain or sun and blended into the city. And also that sometimes the angels come back to claim the public's attention again, like the one I installed in an old post office building in 2003 to commemorate the 5th anniversary of Monsignor Gerardi, and the other one in the National Palace in 2006, and an action in public buses during the Rios Montt trial. This is the one in the post office, which was a much larger version of the image, 7 meters wide. This one is in the National Palace and has the same size and is in the same place as when there is a military parade and they installed the Guatemalan flag there. And it was to like a form of claiming and taking the space that normally belongs to power. And some implications I find interesting is that memory is attached to specific places, concrete, physical, or non-material, ephemeral. This is called memory place, lieu de mémoire, according to a French writer called Pierre Nora. And with the lack of significant official commemorative sites in Guatemala, this angel became at least a dynamic place of memory. If not installed, participating in marches, this march was to remember the massacre of the embassy of Spain, where Rigoberta Menchús, who is on the right of the image, died burnt alive, or in marches dedicated to remember the martyrs of the war. This is in another town of El Quiché called Zacualpa, where it's proven that acts of genocide happened. And at the end of the march, there was a mass in the cemetery, and the priest asked me to put the angel behind the altar, which was really very strong for me to see it as part of the ritual, together with the full books of the Guatemala Never Again report, with the angels that you can see here at the museum. So some of the implications I concluded out of this project is that this street angel transcends the immediate relation with the local place and makes connection with other places, and links stories from different politics and different places, countries. For example, this installation was done, I did it in the old Memorial Stadium of the UT in Austin. And this door commemorated the US intervention in several countries. On the left side, there was World War I and II and the Korea War. And on the right side was Vietnam, Desert Storm, and where the angel is. Later, they put it, the operation in Iraq. And then they destroyed the stadium because they built a new one. And this other one is in front of a military base in Austin called Camp Mabry. But what called my attention was this plane. I am a fan of planes, by the way. And this is a Phantom. And so for me, it became like a phantom of war that flies all around the world. This other one is in Mexico, in the square called Tlatelolco, where on the 2nd of October 1968, hundreds of people were, mostly students and intellectuals, were killed and captured by the Mexican army and police. And it's a bit bizarre that when I could do the installation that happened Sunday morning, I found this group of young people playing to be soldiers. They were practicing, but for me it was part of the idea, because many years before, soldiers were killing and disappearing people there. Now this one is an installation in Hiroshima, in Japan, in the Memorial Park of Peace, where the flame of peace is under that arch behind the angel, and the building you see in the background is the most famous building there, because it's the only one that standed after the explosion of the bomb. And behind me is the Museum of Peace, and also connects, US interventions in the war, and a very difficult to understand act when the atomic bomb was used to stop the war and like stop the suffering, but killed 250,000 in 1 second, and kept killing people until today who suffer the consequences of the nuclear radiation. And this one is closer, is in Virginia Tech, commemorating a massacre that happened there in 2007, in April 2007, April 16, during 2 attacks in the campus of the Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University. An undergraduate student at the university killed 34 people and wounded 17 with semi-automatic pistols until he committed suicide. And this other one is the central campus, the tower of University of Texas at Austin. And another mass murder occurred there on August 1st, 1966, when a 25-year-old Marine veteran fired at members of the public, both within the main building and from the tower that tower you see there. So it's everywhere. So I always try to make and keep dynamic places of memory and make people reflect about the past as a form of social change and construction of a better future. And I try to communicate with as much people as I can, using symbolically resonant spaces in Guatemala and all around the world when I can, and to compare and make parallelisms between the Guatemalan Holocaust and other tragedies across the world, like this one, which is like the most known of all. This is the door of Auschwitz I death camp in Poland, where you read the famous phrase, work liberates, Arbeit macht frei. In that case, I couldn't install the angel, and it was the only time I asked permission, because one of the ideas with the angel is to take the space, to invade a space, and not ask for permission. But in that case, I called the camp from Guatemala to see if it was possible, and they said no. But they already knew the days when I was going to visit the place, so I had to be very creative to do the installation or happening there in order to get the picture. So my idea was that my partner would wear this T-shirt with the picture of the angel in the back and just walk normally entering the camp. And the resulting image really surprised me, because what I felt when I saw the image is like if this group of people is humanity walking without any reflection towards the tragedies. Like we keep repeating and repeating and repeating the same old and sad stories. Stephen Hessler is a scholar from UT who wrote an essay on the book That University, published on my work, which is right here if you want to see it. And he said that what would appear to be a weakness of these lieux de mémoire, these angels, is in fact one of its greatest strengths, because you cannot do anything against it, because it appears and disappears and moves from one place to the other, and it doesn't ossifies. Changes with the levels of care or neglect or opposition or support, and does not become a commonplace that everyone forgets, because there is nothing in this world as invisible as a traditional monument. It's always there, so you forget this person is there. That's something that Robert Musil, another scholar, said. This installation I did it in Guernica in Spain because of the Guernica bombing in 1936. The building you see there is the arm factory called Astra. And when the Italian and German Air Force bombed the city, were very careful not to destroy this building, because they wanted to keep the factory working for the war. And some of the weapons that were used in the Guatemalan war came from that place. And this one is the last I will show you of this project. Is the moving installation we did when Ríos Montt was on trial in courts for genocide. Was the same angel, but this time it had this phrase that yes, there was genocide, and it was on 13 or 15 buses, public transport buses all around the city, and it was very interesting to see it and difficult to find them. And they were surprising people each time they appeared. Even for me, I had really to look for them, because in Guatemala City there are 10,000 buses, and only 15 had the image in different routes. Now, this happened yesterday here. It was the workshop we did with students and teachers to repeat the experience of the street angel. This is when we were putting together the photographs, because each poster is composed of 60 pieces to make it possible in a cheaper and easier way, and clandestine, because when you see just a little piece, you don't really know what is going on until you put it together. And then you have posters when you tape together all the little parts, and then you can install it. This is in the history department, CS. Here you can look at it. I hope there will be a little publication on the internet with a QR code to find them and visit them. and this is in Lake Metoka. And this one was to remember that this land was considered the land of the indigenous people before it was taken out from them. In this photograph is taken in Belgium. These reproductions are the closing piece of the Holocaust and Human Rights Museum from Belgium. They are in permanent exhibition. But one day, a group of dance called Choreo Atelier from Brussels visited the museum. They wanted to do this happening in front of the angels and took the picture, and I found it in the internet. And this one is an image that touches me very much because it happened like 5 years ago. It was a march in another anniversary of the killing of the bishop, Gerardi. But the woman carrying the poster is the granddaughter of Mirna Mack, an anthropologist who was killed during the war. And Lucrecia just died of cancer. So the other strategy is publishing books. The first one is So That All Shall Know, published by the University of Texas Press, which you can find in a desk outside. And it's perhaps the best publication of my work. Yeah. Memory of an Angel, published in Japan when I visited Japan. It's a small book, but very, very nice in Japanese and English. Oh no, Japanese and Spanish. And another one, which I just published a couple of years ago, about the return of the remains of Jacobo Arbenz, the president that fell in 1954. And two books on a project I called in Spanish Guatemala se revela, which means a little more like Guatemala reveals itself, but playing with the meaning of revealing and rebelling. And the project was that I invited anyone who would participate in two portraits in a gray background. The first one with clothes and the second without clothes. So using the body as a way of rebellion. With the revelation of the body, you had the rebellion of the spirit. This is the cover of the book from Texas. And this is the cover from the book of the book from Japan. This is the Arbenz, The End of Exile. That's the funeral procession of Arbenz. And this is the day I presented the book in the Swiss embassy. And on the picture on the left, I'm in the middle, and on the left is Jacobo Arbenz Jr., and on the right is Bernardo Arevalo, the two presidents of the revolution. And on the right is Bernardo, the actual president, with me, and the book. And this is the cover of the Guatemala se revela. And you see the little picture there of the people who participated. Now, since 2015, there have been a lot of changes in Guatemala. There was a big movement in the streets calling for the resignation of the then president Otto Pérez Molina, who was involved during the war in many human rights abuses. He even had a nickname. His name was Otto Pérez, but the nickname was Tito Arias. So people began to protest, and there was a revival of social consciousness. And it was very interesting because you saw in the streets again people of different ages, social classes, intellectual formation, workers, students, and professionals that you didn't see for decades before. and all of them asking for a change in the government and fighting against corruption, because one of the main things about the Otto Pérez Molina's regime was corruption. And demanding, of course, freedom of speech. And the placard in the middle is very important because it says, "No tenemos miedo," we are not scared, which is very, very important. And here you see many young people from different social classes. And something that was very notable and very interesting for me is that there were people from, students from all the universities. Normally, it's only the people from the National University who are considered to be leftists or communists who march. But in this occasion, there was members of all the private universities, which is wonderful, was wonderful. And also peasants, workers from the countryside. And this activism marked a break from Guatemala's history of political passivity among the younger generation. And of course, the indigenous people participated in big numbers. They began to be visible again after the war. And then, to have more change and more hope, and to get hope again, the figure of Bernardo Arévalo appeared in our political horizon. After finishing second in the first round of elections, Arévalo's participation gave hope to people that there was an option of change, and people of all ages began to support him. Personally, I have to confess that I had lost any hope for future before 3 years ago. I just was waiting to die in the most decent way, I mean to live in the most decent way and die at some point, but without any projects or illusions or dreams. But when he appeared, and sorry, this picture is, you see me in the background with a green sweater, and Bernardo had to give a document against some judicial procedure against him at the Constitutional Court. And there was this very small room where the window where he had to put the document was, and I was able to run and get in before and stay close to him like for, I don't know, 30 minutes or something, that these people made him wait to deposit the document, and I could talk to him. I met him some years before because I took photographs of his father's burial in 1990, and I was a good friend of his younger brother, Martin. So when I had him so close, I began to talk to him and tell him what I told you about, that I had lost hope. In aviation, there is a term called blackout. When you have the force of gravity, when you do maneuvers with fighter jets, you feel like the gravity doubles, triples, and your blood goes down and doesn't let you see, and that's called a blackout. That's what I felt. That's how I saw reality, like with a black shadow. But when he appeared, that disappeared, just like that. And I told him, I proposed him to be his photographer, to photograph his legacy. And after several months of insisting, well, finally I succeeded and I am there. I'm happy to be there. This is a tough one. This was a visit he did to the tomb of his father. 2 days before the election. And this is the day of the elections. You could feel that he was going to win. The crowds of people and journalists were chasing him. And this is I think the only time when he and the previous president, Alejandro Yamatei, got together to talk about the transition. But you see how this meeting was hypocritical, and all the collaboration that Yamatei offered to Bernardo was a lie, because in this meeting he said, yes, we are going to cooperate and give you all the information you need, but behind he was together with the Attorney General and ex-militaries and all the corrupt people, trying not to allow Bernardo to take power. So when that problem began, because he was elected, but it wasn't sure that he was going to be able to really become president, another big popular movement began, a fight for democracy, and I don't know, I concluded that there were several strategies. First, marches in support from indigenous organizations by thousands who came from the countryside, because they saw in Arévalos' return, in the form of his son, the opportunity to really ask for their demands and their rights. But also there were rituals, because indigenous people are very profound believers of their culture and their own spirituality. But there was also civil disobedience that could become more violent, and also the diplomatic international support. So this is one of the biggest marches conducted by an organization, an indigenous organization called the 48 Cantones. A canton is a small village, a traditional way of organizing land for the indigenous people. So they gather thousands of people. Also, in every occasion, they did their rituals to call the spirits to support democracy. But on the other hand, there were the people without identity or culture, or who see violence as the only resource. And I love this picture about that, because you saw how things could really get worse. And the diplomatic support, this is one of many meetings Bernardo had, in this case with senators and Congress members from here, conducted by Senator Tim Kaine, and including the Guatemalan Congresswoman Norma Torres and Delia Ramirez, who visited Bernardo like 2 months before he became president. So for me, his arrival is closing a dark parenthesis in Guatemala's history that opened on June 1954, and I hope closes now with his government, with the fall of the revolution, and now this new era of more clear administration. And I say a new beginning with a question mark, because it not only depends on him. He doesn't have the support of the Congress. He has the Attorney General against him, and all the, not all, but many oligarchs and old militaries who are responsible for the atrocities in the war, all of them want Arevalo to fail. And every week they come with another thing and another thing, and I hope he can stand. This photo is the day of his inauguration. And this one is very symbolic, very important for me, because it's the day that he received the baton of command from the Minister of Defense. That's when he really gets power. And for me, it has been difficult to see the army in a different way, but now I've had the opportunity to speak with high-ranking officials and learn that now the army, within the pensum of studies in the military academy, they have a human rights course, and they are very well aware of not doing what they did in the past, so I hope it's true. But for me, this picture is very, very important, is when he really becomes. And this one is a Mayan ceremony that was held on the next day he became president. There were 3 religious ceremonies. The first one, it's called the Te Deum, the Catholic Church Mass of like benediction to the new government. Then another Te Deum from the Evangelical Church behind the palace. And then for me, this was the Mayan Te Deum in a place called Caminaljuyu. It's an old archaeological site within the city where the Maya people go and make ceremonies. And they are under a big ceiba, which is the national tree. So it is very, very symbolic for me. And, well, I hope that we can continue. We Guatemalans. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions or comments, I'm happy.
Thank you, Daniel, for bringing us this knowledge and experience and beauty, and we're very proud to have you here. Daniel's books, the one from UT Austin, is in the hallway outside for sale if you would like to buy copies of it. The other thing that we can do, if you have time and would like to stay around, then we'll be out there. And you can come up and personally ask him questions and chat. We must be out of here by 7 o'clock, but we have up till then for you to stay and visit with Daniel in the hallway or the foyer if you wish. And it's been a delight to have you here as well. Thank you all so very much.